Adaise Okonkwo was 41 years old. She had deep brown eyes that carried quiet sadness and a body that didn't match the perfect image expected of Lagos Island wives. As an Igbo woman married into old money, she was known more for her family's wealth than for who she really was. Behind closed doors, the same people who smiled at her charity events called her names. Her husband, Chidi Obi, was one of them. That morning, their Banana Island mansion smelled of jollof rice and fresh hibiscus flowers. It was Chidi's birthday. The house help had prepared a special breakfast, and Adaise had arranged everything perfectly. She had bought him the latest Range Rover he'd been eyeing, not because he needed it, but because it would look good on his Instagram page. Chidi, 5 years younger than her, was trying to become a senator. He was charming in public and empty in private. They had been married for 8 years. No children, no real connection, no warmth. Sometimes Adaise wondered if he had ever truly loved her, or if she was just another asset on his balance sheet. At 11:30 that morning, she walked down the stairs holding an envelope. Inside was proof of a 50 million naira donation in Chidi's name to a children's hospital in Mushin. She thought it would make him happy. He loved looking generous on social media. The living room was empty, but she heard voices from the balcony. She paused and stood behind the glass door that was slightly open. Then she heard it. "That fat cow disgusts me, Mama," Chidi said, laughing. "I only married her for her father's connections and money." "You think I enjoy touching her?" Adaise stopped breathing. His mother, Chief Mrs. Obi, didn't sound surprised at all. "Just manage her small, my son. After you win this election and get everything signed over to you, you know what to do. That woman's time in your life is almost finished. Do you want to remain tied to someone who looks like a stuffed Akara?" They laughed like people who felt no shame. Adaise swallowed hard. The envelope fell from her hand silently. Her face didn't change, but her hands shook slightly. She backed away slowly, climbed the stairs without her heels making noise, and closed her bedroom door quietly. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't confront them. That night they ate dinner together. Adaise smiled and gave him his gift. Chidi thanked her with a dry peck and fake excitement. His mother said the wine was good and suggested Adaise should try her friend's herbal slimming tea. Everyone laughed except Adaise. She just watched them both with a calm that was more about planning than peace. After midnight, while Chidi slept in the master bedroom, Adaise walked through the house barefoot. She looked at everything. The imported furniture, the expensive art pieces, the grand piano she never learned to play. Every item was a witness to a life that had never really been hers. It was all a show to fit into a world that had been choking her for years. In the study, she pulled out a piece of paper and wrote in steady handwriting, "Thank you for showing me who you really are." She signed it without adding her name. She folded the note, then opened her laptop. In less than 2 hours, she contacted a discreet realtor and transferred most of her assets to a new account in Dubai under a different name. Having managed her family's businesses for years, she knew exactly how to move money without leaving traces. By 6 in the morning, the mansion was behind her. No house help saw her leave. She carried only a small bag, a wrapper, her passport, and a photo of herself at 19 before the Obi family turned her into a trophy wife. 3 hours later, Chidi woke up. He called for his wife, confused by her absence. He checked the kitchen, the garden, the guest rooms. All he found was the piece of paper on his pillow. "Thank you for showing me who you really are." He crumpled the note, not understanding. He didn't suspect she had heard the conversation. He thought it was just her being emotional, woman wahala. He called her phone. It was switched off. He sent WhatsApp messages, no blue ticks. He called his mother. "Where is Adaise?" "Why are you asking me?" She left. She just left a note. "Thank you for showing me who you really are." What does that mean? Chief Mrs. Obi felt a cold fear for the first time. That same day, Chidi discovered the house had been sold. The buyer had wired money directly to an offshore account he couldn't access. Legally, everything belonged to Adaz, even his cars. What Chidi didn't know was that his political rivals had already gotten wind of the story. A reporter who had been investigating him for corruption got an anonymous tip about suspicious financial movements. It was only a matter of days before the scandal would explode on channels TV and TVC. Meanwhile, Adais was sitting in a Danfo bus heading to Ajegunle, a place where nobody would recognize her. She looked out the dirty window, her eyes calm, her mouth set in a straight line. She carried her old photo in her bag like a reminder, and for the first time in years, she breathed easily. She had no plan, no destination, only one goal: to start over from a place where she was nobody, to discover who she really was. On the evening news, the anchor announced, "The wife of senatorial aspirant Chidi Obi has disappeared." There are rumours she sold their mansion and emptied her accounts. Some say kidnapping, others say marriage trouble. Nobody knew for sure, but she did. She knew the real kidnapping had been her entire life. She knew that contempt disguised as marriage would no longer control her. And she also knew that soon people would see a woman who had been called worthless prove that there is nothing more powerful than a woman who decides to save herself. Nobody imagined that behind that quiet exit lay a truth bigger than any betrayal. Adeze Okonkwo hadn't run away. She had woken up. The Danfo moved slowly through dusty streets, the windows fogged with humid Lagos air. Her bag sat on her lap. Inside were no gold jewellery, no designer clothes, no expensive perfumes. Only documents, some cash, a small notebook where she wrote her thoughts, and that old photograph of herself standing at Bar Beach with her arms open like the world belonged to her. Back then, she hadn't met Chidi. Back then, she hadn't become the quiet shadow of a fake life. The bus conductor shouted, "Ajegunle, last stop." Adazi stood up. Nobody looked at her. Nobody recognized the woman who just days ago appeared in This Day newspaper society pages and Bella Niger. In this world, she was invisible, and for the first time, it felt like freedom. Ajegunle wasn't a poor area. It was a struggling one. The buildings looked tired, like they had survived too many rainy seasons and broken promises. Children played football in the streets with bare feet. Women sold akara and pap from wooden tables while carrying babies on their backs. A man grilled suya from a small cart, an old radio playing Fela Kuti songs. Adais walked the streets, observing everything with both fear and curiosity. A handwritten notice on a gate caught her attention. Room for rent, shared toilet, no questions. She knocked on the rusty gate. A woman in her 60s with suspicious eyes came out. "Looking for something?" "I saw the sign. I need a place to stay for a while. I can pay up front." The woman looked her up and down. Something didn't match. Too clean, skin too smooth, posture too straight for this environment. "Name?" Adazi hesitated for just a moment. Ngozi Easy. Strange name combination. Come inside. The room is free, but I don't give refunds and I don't want trouble. "You won't have any." The room was tiny with a small mattress on the floor, a ceiling fan that made grinding noises, and a window with torn netting. The walls had mould stains. It smelled of dampness, but to her it felt like sanctuary. She paid for a month and settled in. That night, she didn't cry. She just lay on the hard mattress, closed her eyes, and let the silence do its work. The next day, she walked around the neighbourhood introducing herself as a woman who lost everything to business fraud. It wasn't a complete lie, though not for the reasons people imagined. They looked at her with pity and curiosity. She was new, she was different. She was another sad story in a place full of them. She found a small community health centre. The paint was peeling. Inside were a few old examination beds, plastic chairs with broken legs, and a reception desk made of wood planks. A woman was arguing with someone about medicine she couldn't afford. "Madam, I told you we don't have that antibiotic here. If you buy it outside, I can't guarantee it's real. The voice belonged to a tall man with tired eyes and rolled-up sleeves. His face showed exhaustion, but his tone was firm, yet kind. Adais watched him for a few seconds. He glanced at her briefly, then returned to his patient. Tell your daughter to keep coming. Even if you don't have money, we don't turn people away here. We'll find the medicine somehow. When they finished, Adais approached. Are you the doctor? I'm Dr. Emeka Nwosu. Do you need treatment? No, I came to volunteer. I have experience in business management and organisation. Maybe I can help with supplies, donations, coordination. Emeka studied her in silence. Something about how she spoke, the confidence in her voice, didn't match her story of losing everything. But he didn't push. He extended his hand. Welcome, Ngozi. This place needs more hands than questions. And so it began. In the following days, Adaz learned to organise medical supplies, coordinate small donations, and help however she could. Nobody asked about her past. What mattered was what she did now. It was at that clinic she met Blessing. She was 7 years old with tired eyes that seemed too old for her face. She sat on the examination table, her head resting on her grandmother's shoulder. Mama Blessing, she hasn't eaten for 3 days, the grandmother said. She has fever at night and her body is getting weaker. Emeka examined her, ordered tests, then stepped into the corridor and leaned against the wall, his face tight. What is it? Adais asked. I suspect leukemia, but we need lab tests and that costs money we don't have. Adaz looked through the window. Blessing was playing with a broken doll, whispering to it softly. Mama Blessing approached Adaz after Emeka left. You're not from here. Your hands are too soft. Your back is too straight. Life here bends people. Adaz didn't reply. Don't worry. I had my secrets when I was young too. I'm not judging you. I'm just saying when a woman is hiding something, she must choose carefully who she lets see her, because some people look for what they can take and others look for who you really are. Dr. Emeka is the second type. Adaze nodded, a lump in her throat. 2 weeks passed. Adaze became part of the place, not for what she knew, but for what she gave. Time, attention, commitment. She cleaned, assisted, carried supplies. At night, she wrote in her notebook, one sentence over and over. I never had time for the poor until I became one of them. One morning, while organising files in the small office, the phone rang. Emeka answered casually, but his face changed when he heard a name. Obi. Are you sure? And that file still exists? Adase dropped a box. He looked at her, noticed her shaking. You okay? He asked. Yes, just felt dizzy. Emeka finished the call in silence. He didn't explain. He just went outside to smoke. Adaz felt her heart pounding. Obi. That name was a gunshot through her memory, the echo of everything she wanted to bury. Later, she saw him sitting alone. She approached. Can I ask what that call was about? Emeka hesitated. It's about an old patient case. They mentioned a name I haven't heard in years. Obi Adazi felt cold. Do you know them? She lied as she had learned to do to survive. No. Emeka didn't push, but his eyes looked at her like someone starting to see through a disguise. Adazi couldn't sleep that night. She sat on her mattress, the bag open, the photograph in her hand, and the notebook heavy with unspoken truths. She was no longer Adaize, but Ngozi Eze was also beginning to crack. In this game of false names and hidden truths, she didn't know how much longer she could hold everything together. There are wounds that heal and others that suffocate you. The Obi name was one of the latter. The question wasn't if Chidi would find her. The question was whether when he did, she would be strong enough to face him, or if she would fall back into the invisible prison she had fought so hard to escape. Adaz looked at herself in the cracked mirror of the shared bathroom as she washed her face. The water was brownish and cold, and the dirty tiles reflected someone she didn't fully recognize yet. Ngozi Eze. That name had become armor. She wore it more easily now, though part of her still trembled inside. Weeks passed slowly, but something within her began to change. The simple routine, the real human connections, the absence of pretense, it all started to reshape her heart like fire shapes metal. She no longer thought constantly about Chidi. She no longer replayed those hateful words like a knife in her chest. Now she thought about other things. Blessing's smile, the tiredness in Emeka's eyes, Mama Blessing's knowing gaze, and an idea that began to grow strongly. To build something new from the ruins, not just for herself, but for other women who had also been used, manipulated, and silenced. Blessing had become her center. The girl clung to her with complete trust, as if she had been waiting for her all along. They played with handmade dolls, invented silly stories, and shared silences that said more than 1,000 words. Adaizi didn't need to be a biological mother to feel that connection. Deep down, she knew this was the love life had denied her. "Have you ever felt invisible too?" Blessing asked one morning as they drew on the ground with chalk. "Yes, many times," Adaiz replied. "Then we're the same," the girl said, "because when people are afraid, they look away and then you stop existing." Adaiz felt a lump in her throat. She wondered how many times she herself had looked away, locked in her bubble of luxury and appearances, how many times she had pretended not to see suffering from her air-conditioned car. That guilt was a silent, constant companion. One hot afternoon, the neighborhood organized a community fair to raise funds. Emeka suggested it as a way for everyone to relax, but it was Adaiz who took charge. She convinced the women to make chin-chin, puff-puff, and handmade crafts. She coordinated spaces, timing, permissions. In just days, she became central to the community. "I don't know who you were before, Ngozi," Mama Blessing told her while they kneaded dough together, "but who you are now is good for this place." Adai smiled. She had stopped correcting people when they called her by her new name. It was more than a disguise. It was a version of herself she wanted to make real. In the midst of this small rebirth, an unexpected memory surfaced. Emeka was talking to a nurse about an old case. They mentioned something that made Adazi's stomach turn. "Chief Mrs. Obi was my private patient," Emeka said, unaware Adazi was listening nearby. "I was fired years ago when I refused to cover up illegal prescriptions for wealthy patients. Her son, that politician Chidi, threatened to destroy my medical license if I spoke up." Adazi felt a sharp pain. Her story and Emeka's had been connected long before they met. The same family name, the same corruption. The circle was closing without them knowing. Or perhaps fate was crueler than she imagined. That night, as the fair ended, Adaiz climbed onto the flat roof of the building where she lived. She looked at the night sky, and for the first time since she fled, she let tears flow. It wasn't sadness. It was a bitter mix of gratitude and pain. She was alive. She was free. But there were still shadows she couldn't erase. Miles away in Lagos Island, Chidi threw his glass of cognac against his office wall. The glass shattered. Nobody dared look up. His senatorial campaign was collapsing. Some sponsors were backing out. Bloggers were starting to dig. Journalists were following the trail of the suspicious mansion sale. Adaz's disappearance had become a full scandal. "Find her," he ordered the private investigator he had hired, a former SARS officer with a hard face. "I don't care how. I need her back before this destroys me completely." The man nodded without emotion. He already had some leads, bank transfers, phone records, grainy CCTV footage. It was only a matter of time. Meanwhile, Adazi visited an old abandoned warehouse on the edge of the neighborhood. Nobody followed her. Nobody suspected she had quietly bought the place using her new identity. Her plan was clear: transform it into a foundation for women who were victims of abuse. A real shelter with counselors, food, housing, and legal help. A place where women like her could start over without having to lie about their names. She wrote everything in a thick notebook: needs, suppliers, funding ideas. Emeka helped her without asking too many questions. He no longer looked at her with suspicion, but with something closer to respect, though a deep sadness still lived in his eyes. "I lost my wife to misdiagnosed pneumonia," he confessed one night. "Private hospitals make mistakes too. They just hide them better." Adaz listened without speaking. She knew that in a way he too had been broken by a rotten system. At the fair, Blessing was selling handmade beaded bracelets. Her smile was brighter than the kerosene lamps around them. She ran between the stalls with energy. Mama Blessing watched her with tired but happy eyes. Everything seemed to be going well until the unexpected happened. Blessing suddenly collapsed. Her body shook briefly before going still. Blood came from her nose. The silence was immediate. Emeka ran to her, lifted her in his arms and shouted orders. Adaz followed, barely feeling her legs. At the clinic, they connected an IV, took samples, gave oxygen. The diagnosis came like ice water. "The leukemia has progressed," Emeka said, his voice breaking, "and we don't have what we need to treat her here." Adaz clenched her fists. She wouldn't stand by, not now, not with this girl who had given her back her soul. That night, while Blessing slept with fever, Adaz opened her bag and checked her last reserve. A single piece of jewelry she had hidden carefully, the only one she hadn't sold or left behind. It was her grandmother's gold bangle with coral beads, worth more than what most families in the neighborhood earned in a year. She held it tight in her fist and took a bus into the city. The next morning, she returned with a sealed envelope and a check large enough to begin treatment. Nobody asked how she got it. Nobody had the right. But Emeka looked at her with new eyes. Not suspicion, certainty. "You didn't come here to hide," he told her. "You came here to rebuild yourself. And you know what? You're doing it, even if you're still breathing through lies." Adaz looked down for the first time. She wanted to tell him the truth, tell him her real name, her story, everything. But she didn't, not yet. From her bed, Blessing smiled at her with dry lips. "Don't leave me." "Never," Adaz replied, taking her hand. The clock kept ticking. Chidi kept searching. But Adaz was no longer the woman who stayed quiet when she heard she disgusted him. Now she was a woman who fought, even if fear still breathed behind every smile. Because lies, when carried too long, begin to take on a life of their own. And hers were breathing. The question was how much longer she could keep them under control. Because when a lie learns to breathe, it can also learn to kill. Adaz woke before dawn, as she had almost every day since taking the name Ngozi Eze. The ceiling fan made constant noise, and the damp walls seemed greyer than ever. She squeezed her eyes shut before opening them fully. She wanted to avoid for a moment the reality that weighed like concrete on her chest. Blessing was still in the hospital, connected to medications that could barely slow the leukemia's progress. Every minute was a battle. Every smile from the girl was a shield against despair. And despite securing initial funds by selling that hidden bangle, she knew it wouldn't be enough. The treatment would be long, brutal, and expensive. Not just in money, but in spirit. At the clinic, Emeka watched her more closely. Her movements, her silences, her careful way of avoiding talk about herself. It wasn't just respect he felt anymore. There was something more troubling, an intuition, as if he was walking on a map he already knew, but with the names erased. He was beginning to suspect the story she told was shortened, controlled, and polished. Something inside him said there was more, much more beneath that sad calm. That morning, while checking medicine inventory in the small pharmacy area, Emeka made a comment that wasn't accidental. "Ngozi, did you ever live abroad? You have an accent, neutral and educated. It's not common here." She stopped, swallowed, and thought fast. "I studied in Ghana for some years, then worked in Abuja for a while. That's why I sometimes sound different." Emeka nodded without saying anything, but the doubt in his eyes deepened. Hours later, Adazi visited the abandoned warehouse where she had begun planning the foundation. She sat on a broken crate and pulled out her notebook. She wrote a single sentence: "Fear is a cage with open doors." She closed the notebook and took a deep breath. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, and there was Mama Blessing with a bag of bread in one hand and a sharp look on her face. "I looked for you at the clinic." "Blessing asked about you," she said directly. Ade stood up, dusting off her hands. "I just came to write down some plans. I need to get this place running before everything falls apart." The old woman placed the bread on a crate. "You're not running from business fraud or financial ruin. I knew that from the first day, not because of what you say, but because of what you keep quiet. You don't run from love, child. You only run from fear. And you, who do you fear?" The question hung in the air like thick smoke. Adazi wanted to answer, but she didn't have enough words for everything she carried inside. She only whispered, her voice choked, "Myself." The old woman nodded. She didn't need more. She left the bread, gently touched Adaeze's shoulder, and left without goodbye. Meanwhile, in Ikoyi, Chidi stared at his laptop with controlled rage. Before his eyes was a photo taken by a volunteer at the community fair in Ajigunle. In the image, a group of women gathered around a food table. In one corner, almost blurred but unmistakable, was her. Adaeze. Chidi's heart pounded violently. He stood up, threw his chair backward, and shouted an order. "Get the car ready. We're going to Ajigunle." 3 hours later, his black Lexus SUV with tinted windows slid through the dusty streets of the neighborhood, completely out of place. People looked at it with distrust. Some stepped aside, others pretended not to see. Adaz was returning from buying bandages for the clinic. She was walking quickly when she saw the car parked in front of the health center entrance. She stopped dead. Her stomach dropped, her chest tightened. She would recognize that vehicle from anywhere. She didn't think, she didn't analyze. She simply turned and began walking in the opposite direction, not running, but with the exact pace of someone escaping without wanting to look like they're escaping. She ducked into an alley, then another, climbed over some broken concrete blocks, and hid behind a rusted fence until the car started and disappeared. He hadn't seen her. Chidi hadn't found her, but he was close, too close. She couldn't sleep that night. Fear had returned like an old sickness. She wondered how much longer she could hold this fragile life together before everything fell apart. At the clinic, Blessing waited for her with bright eyes. She held out a bracelet made of red and yellow threads. "It's so you won't leave," the girl said. "Now you're tied to me." Adaze knelt by the bed. She stroked her forehead. "I'm tied to you even without wearing it." "Are you sad?" "A little." "Why?" "You saved my life." Adaze held back tears. "Because I don't know how to save my own." Emeka, listening from the doorway, felt something inside him break. He couldn't handle the uncertainty anymore. This woman wasn't just anyone. She had wounds that didn't match her invented story. That morning, when everyone was resting, Emeka went into the clinic's small office and opened his laptop. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for until he did it. He typed the name that had been haunting him since he met Ngozi Eze, Adaeze Okonkwo. The browser returned hundreds of results: photos at society events, newspaper society pages, news of her disappearance, articles about a mysterious mansion sale, political scandals, and an image that froze him. The same smile, the same eyes, the same face he had learned to read in recent months. Ngozi Eze didn't exist. She was a mask, a lie, but everything she had done was real. The help, the kindness, the devotion. This woman with a past of broken glass had saved lives. She had resurrected her own. And now he knew who she really was. Adaeze Okonkwo, the disappeared wife of the man who had fired, humiliated, and destroyed him. The circle was closing. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes. He could no longer pretend he didn't know. And now he had to decide what to do with that truth, because the price of knowing is the power to look away, and he wouldn't do that again. Emeka woke up without having slept. The image of Adaeze Okonkwo on his screen was burned into his mind. Ngozi Eze didn't exist. He had watched how she healed others' wounds while carrying her own in unbearable silence. He knew that if he confronted her, nothing would ever be the same. But silence was also a way of betraying what he valued most: the truth. He found her sitting on the clinic steps, the notebook in her hands. She wasn't writing, she was just holding it as if it kept her balanced. "We need to talk," he said directly. She looked up. Her gaze showed no surprise. Deep down, she already knew that he knew. "Yes," she replied, slowly closing the notebook. "It's time." They went to the warehouse, that empty space slowly filling with meaning. Emeka watched her with the controlled expression of someone about to throw a stone into water, knowing they can't stop the ripples. "Why did you lie?" Adaze leaned against the wall. Her voice was low but firm. "Because if I told the truth, they would hunt me. He would find me, they would use me again, and I no longer had strength to be a pretty object to display at parties." "Adaeze Okonkwo," Emeka said, as if the name hurt his mouth. "Wife of Chidi Obi, heiress to one of the biggest fortunes in Nigeria. Disappeared, turned into a national mystery and a broken woman. They didn't put that in the headlines." Emeka looked down. She stepped closer, looking him in the eyes. "I didn't lie to play games. I didn't do it to manipulate anyone. I just wanted a life that didn't hurt." "And did you find it?" Adaze smiled sadly. "Sometimes. When blessing laughs, when you talk to me without expecting anything, when I clean wounds without cameras around." He listened, but there was more inside him than words, more than judgment. "You're not a coward," he finally said. "You were brave to leave, but now you have to be brave enough to come back." "Come back to what?" "To say your name out loud, to face them, to take back what's yours. Because if you don't, they will, and they'll take everything again, just like they always have." She looked at him for a long time, and something in her chest cracked. Meanwhile, in Abuja, the media exploded with headlines. An anonymous report from a whistleblower revealed documents, audio recordings, and financial movements linking Chidi Obi and his mother, Chief Mrs. Obi, to cases of money laundering, misuse of campaign funds, and bribery of electoral officials. Chidi screamed furiously at his lawyers on the phone. Chief Mrs. Obi didn't leave her room, not from shame, but from fear. That morning, an envelope had arrived at her gate with no return address. Inside was a copy of an altered medical record and a letter that simply read, "The truth can't be erased." Chief Mrs. Obi didn't need more. The past she had buried with silence was coming back to demand justice. In desperation, she did something she hadn't done in years. She called Emeka. He received the call at the clinic. Her voice was almost unrecognizable. Broken. "Emeka, I need to talk to you, only you." Emeka hesitated, but agreed. He met her at a small hotel in Ikeja, far from cameras. Chief Mrs. Obi had aged visibly in just weeks. She wore no jewelry or makeup, only dark circles, tremors, and fear in her hands. "I'm not here to justify myself," she said without looking at him. "I know what I did." "But you need to know something. Chidi is not my biological son." Emeka blinked. "What are you saying?" "My husband and I could never have children. I was assaulted by a man when I was 17. I hid it. I pretended to be the legitimate mother. I raised that child as if I didn't remember how he came into the world." Emeka felt the air grow thick. "And you never told him?" "Never. Until now, because he is becoming that man and I can't allow it." There was a long silence. Then Chief Mrs. Obi pulled out a small envelope. Inside were photographs, documents, and a sealed letter. "Blessing that girl. What was her mother's name?" She died in childbirth. She's not in official records. Look at the dates, the details. That girl could be connected to my past. The son of the man who assaulted me might have had a daughter, and that daughter might be with you now. Emeka left that place as if carrying a dead weight. He didn't understand how to connect all the pieces, but something told him the truth was closer than he imagined. That night, Adaze was waiting for him at the warehouse. She had been cleaning, organizing, distracting herself, but seeing his face, she knew he brought more than bad news. What happened? He told her everything, about Chief Mrs. Obi, about Chidi, about the possibility with Blessing. Adaze remained silent, then walked to the window and spoke without looking at him. I have something to tell you too. Emeka swallowed. I'm sick. Multiple sclerosis. I was diagnosed a year ago. That's another reason why I left. I didn't want to die surrounded by people who would only care about my inheritance. Emeka didn't know what to say. I have a few years left, maybe less if I'm unlucky, but I want that time to mean something. It will, he replied, his eyes wet. We're going to build this foundation. We're going to leave something that lasts even after you're gone. She hugged him for the first time without fear, as if touching him could anchor her body to this earth that would soon begin to fail her. When she returned to her room, Adaze found an envelope with her name written in cursive. She opened it. It was a letter. She recognized the handwriting before reading it. It was from her mother. Adaze, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I don't know how much damage I did to you. I only know there were years when I resented you because you were everything I could never be, because your father loved you more than me, because you shone without trying, and I was just a grey woman trapped in a fancy house. Forgive me for being harsh, for not protecting you, for not telling you that you deserved better than a husband who only wanted you for your family name. I knew it from the first day, but I kept quiet as always. This letter is not an excuse. It's a confession and a request. Don't let my bitterness live in you. Be free. Be strong. And when you can't go on anymore, don't hide it. Allow yourself to be cared for, loved, supported. Because even if you don't say it, you also deserve to be saved. Adaze cried the kind of tears that shake the soul, the kind that release years of invisible chains. The foundation wasn't finished yet. Chidi was still searching for her. The diagnosis was still in her body. But that night, for the first time, she slept without fear. Because the truth hurts, yes, but it also frees. And she no longer had room to carry lies. Now she just wanted to build something before her body gave out. And she would do it with Emeka, with Blessing, with her truth as her only inheritance. The work on the old warehouse finished 3 weeks ahead of schedule, the hands of the neighbourhood united, as if the project had always belonged to them. Men who barely finished primary school laid bricks with precision. Women who carried years of pain painted walls as if they were washing wounds. Every cement block, every tile held a story, stories that until then nobody had wanted to hear. The Ngozi Easy Foundation opened its doors in a ceremony without press, without cameras, without empty speeches. Only those who mattered were there. Blessing, her hair already thin from chemotherapy, carried the scissors to cut the ribbon. Emeka, his eyes misted, held Adaze's hand as she took a deep breath, as if each breath was an act of resistance against death. Adaze had completed the legal paperwork weeks earlier. All her remaining assets, accounts, investments, and properties had been transferred to the foundation's name. Not a single piece of gold, not one property remained under her own name. Everything that was once a symbol of oppression would now be a tool of salvation. Adaze walked slowly through the new building's corridors. The white walls, the murals painted by neighbourhood children, the empty consultation rooms waiting for patients. It all moved her deeply. This place wasn't just a structure, it was her legacy, her redemption. Days later, in the shadow of a hallway corner, Chief Mrs. Obi appeared. Nobody had seen her arrive. She was dressed simply, without makeup or gold jewelry. Her eyes were swollen, and her body stooped as if she had been dragging guilt for years that was finally too heavy. Blessing was sleeping when Chief Mrs. Obi entered her room. She sat by the bed and awkwardly stroked the girl's hand. She whispered words that seemed directed more at herself than at the girl. Then she left silently, but Adaz was waiting for her outside. "I knew you would come," she said. Chief Mrs. Obi looked down. "I didn't come to justify myself. I came to ask for your forgiveness, not for Chidi. He chose his path already. I came to ask forgiveness for myself, for being an accomplice, for keeping quiet." Daisy didn't speak for several seconds. "And you expect me to forgive you?" "No, just to listen to me, then speak. I watched you fade away for years. You became something so perfect it was impossible to see you. You were invisible, Daisy, invisible just as I was my whole life. I was used, manipulated, forced to keep quiet too, and you were my mirror. That's why I resented you, because you reminded me of everything I didn't dare to do." Adazi stepped closer, not to hug her, but just to look her straight in the eye. "I hear you, but I don't forgive you for what you did to me. I forgive you for what you did to yourself." Chief Mrs. Obi released the tears she had held back for decades. On television, Chidi was news, no longer as a politician, but as a suspect. His image appeared among headlines of corruption, money laundering, and ties to campaign fraud networks. He had been expelled from his party. His face no longer sold hope, it sold scandal. And then, as a last resort, he appeared in front of the foundation. Adazi watched him from the second floor. She felt neither fear nor rage. She felt something colder, a sad compassion, like someone observing a person who was already lost. He waited for her in the compound. He held a briefcase and looked older than the years that had passed. "I didn't come to fight," he said as soon as he saw her. "I came to make a deal." "There are no deals with you," she replied calmly. "I have proof, documents. I could destroy you with a public lie. I could say you stole everything, that you faked your disappearance to take my money." "I already did. I took everything, but not the material things. I took back the dignity you threw away years ago." She stepped closer, looking him in the eyes. "Do you really think this place is worth less than everything you had?" "Number. I think this place is the only thing that is worth anything, because you can keep all the material things. What you will never have is peace." Chidi took a step back. The truth hit him harder than any threat. "And tell your mother that I heard her. And Blessing doesn't need to know who her grandfather was. She already has enough love. She doesn't need yours." Before he could reply, Adaz reached into her bag and handed him an envelope. "If this is the last thing you will ever have from me." Chidi walked away without opening it. Later, in his empty flat in Victoria Island, he read it. "Power without love is hollow. Money without soul is death. You killed me many times when I was alive, but I resurrected, and you are still buried in your own ego. We are no longer enemies. We are nothing. Learn to be alone. Maybe then you'll start to find yourself." Emeka and Adaez shared a night together. It wasn't a night of passion, it was a night of truth. They slept in the same bed, listening to each other breathe, like two castaways holding each other in the middle of the ocean. "Are you scared?" he asked. "I have peace, which isn't the same as the absence of fear, but it's enough. I love you." She didn't respond with words. She took his hand and placed it on her chest. The next morning, Emeka went to buy akara and pop for breakfast. When he returned, he found her asleep, smiling, but she wasn't breathing. He walked over, touched her, and knew she was gone. He didn't scream or cry instantly. He just sat beside her and held her hand until the sun fully rose. On the table were envelopes with handwritten names. One for Emeka, one for Blessing, one for Mama Blessing, one for Chief Mrs. Obi. Emeka's note read, "Don't cry for what wasn't. Be thankful for what was. I leave the life I wanted for myself in your hands. Never let anyone doubt your light, because you made me shine even in the darkness." Blessing's note read, "You taught me that a smile can heal more than medicine. Promise me you will write your story because the world needs to know about a little girl who defeated fear." The Ngozi Easy Foundation continued to stand. It grew, it healed, it embraced. And on one of its main walls, a mural with Adazi's smiling face reminded everyone that some women, though they may die, never truly leave. Because what changes the world isn't money, it's the truth and the love that is built from it. Emeka didn't know how long he stayed by her side, maybe an hour, maybe two. The world seemed to have stopped in that simple room where she, with her quiet body and her smile still present, had decided to go without dramatic goodbyes, without noise, without fear. She left as she had lived her last months, in silence, but leaving marks that couldn't be erased. There was no funeral in a marble cemetery, no church service with chandeliers, no fake speeches from politicians. Her body was cremated as she requested, and her ashes were scattered in the garden of the Ngozi Easy Foundation, right where they planted a young mango tree that Blessing promised to water every morning. The news of her death spread quickly through the neighborhood. Women wept at the gate, children fell silent, and Blessing went days without speaking. Emeka moved on autopilot, but he didn't stop. Things had to continue, and he promised himself he wouldn't let her story be buried in that white room. It was Blessing who discovered something more. Weeks later, in one of Adazi's desk drawers, she found a carefully bound manuscript in the same clear, firm handwriting she used for notes at the clinic. The handwritten title read, "My husband called me worthless." The prologue began, "This is not the story of a woman abandoned, but of a woman who learned to abandon herself to please the world and one day woke up." Emeka read it in a single night. When he finished, he knew what he had to do. Months later, the book was published by Cassava Republic Press. Nobody expected the sensation it would become. It went viral, first on Twitter and Instagram, then on radio stations and TV shows. Women bought it quietly, shared it with tears in their eyes, whispered about it at Awambe parties and church meetings, and discussed it in university lecture halls. Adazi's story wasn't just about a betrayed wife, it was about every woman who had ever felt less than enough. In interviews, Emeka appeared to talk about the foundation's work. He never took a single kobo for the book. All proceeds were dedicated to creating new Ngozi Ezi Foundation locations in other states. The idea was clear. No woman should have to disappear to live again. Blessing was the one who named the second location. She called it the House of the Reborn. It was small, modest, but full of life. She herself painted a wall with the phrase Adaze left her in her letter, "Promise me you will write your story." And she did. Blessing wrote. She published a children's book inspired by her experiences, where a little girl defeated the monster of grey days with a smile and a red bracelet. She was invited to book readings at Terra Culture. She gave interviews on Channels TV. She always spoke of Adaze as if she were still alive, and for her she was. Emeka continued as the foundation's medical director. There were days when the weight of her absence fell upon him like concrete. But all he had to do was step into the garden and see the women laughing, the children playing, the volunteers arriving with enthusiasm to know that Ades had won, that her love had not died, that her legacy was not ash but a root. He wore a small pendant around his neck. Inside was a lock of hair she had given him before she died, along with a note, "When you doubt yourself, touch this." Here is the part of me that will never leave. He never opened it in public, only on solitary nights when the silence hurt. Chief Mrs. Obi also changed. Nobody believed it at first, not even herself. But she did. She began visiting shelters for vulnerable women. She became an anonymous volunteer at a center for domestic violence victims. And most unexpectedly, she donated all her properties, shares, and accounts to the Ngozi Easy Foundation. She disappeared from the public eye. Nobody ever heard from her again. Some say she went to a monastery in Enugu, others that she moved to Ghana. The truth is that her name ceased to be associated with power and became a silent shadow that no longer sought to control anything. Chidi, for his part, sank. He lost everything: fortune, reputation, political allies. He tried to publish a tell-all book to clear his name, but nobody bought it. He faded into obscurity, as men who built empires only on lies do. Emeka once saw him at a buka in Yaba, alone, unkempt, with a lost look. He didn't approach. He didn't say anything. He just thought of what Adaz had written in that last letter. "We are no longer enemies. We are nothing." A year after her death, the foundation organized a special memorial in her name. People came from different places. Women who had read her book, who had escaped violent homes, who had been rescued from trafficking, who had healed in silence thanks to her story. They spoke out loud, without shame, without fear. At the end of the event, a woman took the microphone and said, "I was invisible until I read her story." Adaz didn't die. She woke up in me and in many others. Emeka closed his eyes and smiled. As he left, Blessing took his hand. "Do you think she sees us from up there? I have no doubt. She is in you, in me, in all of us. I dream about her sometimes. What does she say? To keep writing." That words heal too. And Blessing wrote a poem that night, her handwriting shaky but determined. She came like rain to dry land, not to be worshipped, but to water seeds. She left like morning mist, but the flowers she planted still bloom. The foundation grew to 12 locations across Nigeria. From Sokoto to Calabar, from Kano to Port Harcourt, the name Ngozi Eze became synonymous with hope. Women arrived broken and left whole. Children arrived hungry and left fed. Families arrived torn and left mended. And in every single location on the main wall was the same mural. Adazi's face, smiling, with words underneath that she once wrote in her notebook. "I was invisible until I decided to see myself." The mango tree in Ajagunle grew tall and strong. Every year, on the anniversary of her death, the neighborhood gathered under its shade. They shared food, told stories, and remembered the woman who taught them that strength doesn't come from wealth or power. It comes from choosing yourself when the world tells you you're not worth choosing. Emeka grew old there. He never remarried. He never left. He just continued the work, day after day, patient after patient, woman after woman, until his own body gave out at 73 years old. They buried him in the foundation's garden, right next to the mango tree where Adaz's ashes were scattered. Blessing, now a grown woman with children of her own, stood at his grave and read from the book one last time. This is not the story of a woman abandoned, but of a woman who learned to abandon herself to please the world and one day woke up. And in waking, she woke others. And in dying, she refused to let her death be the end. She closed the book and looked at her daughter, a bright-eyed girl of 7, who reminded her so much of herself at that age. "Who was she, Mama?" "She was a woman who saved my life." "How?" "By showing me that even when the world calls you worthless, you get to decide your own worth." The little girl thought about this, then picked a mango from the tree and took a bite. "This is sweet, Mama." "Yes, baby, it is." And in that sweetness, in that simple moment under the shade of a tree planted in memory, in the laughter of children who would never know hunger, in the safety of women who would never know fear again, Adaze Okonkwo lived on. Not as a name in newspapers, not as a scandal or a mystery, but as a seed that refused to die. Because some stories don't end, they just grow and grow and grow.